to our Fail-a-Bration today. We are going to not just talk about and accept and tolerate, but even try to celebrate a little bit failure and why it's good for us, why it's important, and why we shouldn't be so afraid of it. So sometimes I do this presentation and I have some statistics in it about people's fears, and I don't think I put that slide in today, but fear of failure is like the top failure in all adults everywhere, across the board. Failure is something that most people really try to avoid at all costs. And I'm hoping to convince you today that failure shouldn't be avoided. And we actually really need to embrace it as part of creativity and innovation and growth. So let's see if we can get there today. And if you're not already afraid of failure, fantastic, because then you're going to be a really great voice for those of us in the audience that could use the support. So, our plan over the next 90 or so minutes is that we're going to identify some of our own personal and cultural fears around failure, right? Why does it get to us so much? And for you, if you don't resonate with that, if you aren't someone who yourself is really pushing back against failure, also thinking about this in terms of your students, your colleagues, the people that you support, failure can really be something that folks struggle with. Understanding how fear of failure impacts how we make decisions, how we take risks, how we kind of go for things outside of our comfort zone, how it impacts our ability to be innovative, and actually how it impacts our own mental health and well-being. We're going to explore some real world examples of productive failure and how failure has actually kind of worked in a positive way in some places. And then we're going to be practicing some tools and some mindsets for really trying to flip the script for ourselves of how do we go from beating ourselves up over failure to embracing and learning from it and thinking about it as maybe not such a dirty word. And then hopefully this is going to end up with an opportunity for us to co-create within our own teams, offices, campuses, a team culture that really destigmatizes this idea that failure is wrong or bad or that we should avoid it. And it's something instead that can really help us to kind of get where we want to be. So, a little warm up since we have a relatively small group. I think we can do this out loud. Yeah, we will. Um, I would love for you to tell us what is just a tiny fail you had recently, right? We're going to practice normalizing failure. So, the way we're going to do this is a popcorn. I'm going to give you a fail, and then I'm just going to call on someone else in the room. And then when you give your fail, you'll call on the next person. So, a tiny fail I had recently is I have two. One, I have a new puppy. He's 50 pounds. He's almost a year old. We got him as a rescue. And I was outside in the backyard doing something. I didn't want him out there for some reason. And he was inside and he was jumping up on the back door. And he managed to flip the lock on the screen or on the sliding door and lock me out of my own house the other day. So I had to wait until my neighbor came home with my spare key to get back in. It was hot. And my other fail is earlier this week, I missed a client appointment with a therapy client because I had her scheduled for next week and she had me scheduled for this week. And I wasn't checking my phone all day because I was busy. And I checked my phone at 7 o'clock that night and realized I had missed her appointment. So those are my two fails. But I will call on, let's start with Brittany. Brittany, give us a tiny fail you had recently.
So my boys go to summer camp for the summer, and the district has been great about providing them with lunch. However, with school starting back up, they've moved locations and we are having to pack lunches for them. Well, I got my dates mixed up and dropped them off on a day that we were supposed to be bringing lunch for them. And I did not pack them with a lunch. And so I said, you know what? Okay, I'm going to run to Meyer. I'm going to pick up some Lunchables and I'll be back in like 10 minutes and it'll be great. But definitely one of those mom fail moments. But that was not a big deal, but definitely felt huge guilt in the moment.
Yeah, totally. Why don't you choose someone to go next?
I'll go with Christopher.
Hello, everyone. Christopher Maxwell from Harold Washington College. Over the weekend, I was doing some woodwork to fix up some studs on my wall. And as I was doing my measurements, thinking everything was right, I realized I had undercut and I had a limited supply of wood. So I had to put in an order to grab more wood and make more cuts. Thankfully, it all worked out, but I was so mad at the moment because I pride myself at being precise, and for some reason I wasn't. So I had to just like accept, yep, I oopsed, and let it go.
Oh, thanks, Christopher. That's so frustrating. My husband's a carpenter, and the amount of wasted wood that's always in our driveway and garage all the time blows my mind. So it happened.
All right, next I will pass it on to Pedro.
Oh, maybe Pedro's away from his computer at the minute. Do you want to choose someone else?
Sure, sure. Jocelyn.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, good morning, everyone. Jocelyn from City College's Wright College. I am a huge coffee drinker, like every day. And I have an upcoming trip. So to some, it may not seem like a lot, but I went over budget with my coffee intake for the past 2 weeks, which means that today's Wednesday, so tomorrow, Friday, I cannot have coffee until next week, so that I could stay within my budget and not go over, so that I can continue to save enough money and have my money ready for my trip that's upcoming in 2 weeks exactly. So, going over budget, not it, and then again, I think I'm also do pretty well with my budget. So it was one of those things where I'm like, how did I miss overspending, at a particular store, particularly coffee. But I will popcorn over to Crystal.
Hi, everyone. I know we all make mistakes all the time because it's human nature. I can't think of something super recently, but I am our transfer, well, I am our transfer coordinator on campus. We actually just recently hired somebody in the role, but they just started. So I submit our courses for IAI, and in the spring, I had submitted one of our math courses, not realizing they needed the sequence submitted with it. So it got returned for me to have to resubmit it this fall, which isn't a big deal. It just is a frustrating detail that I'm glad I have somebody that can help manage some of that attention to detail that comes with that role.
It happens to the best of us. Thanks for sharing that one, Crystal. Who goes next?
I stepped out earlier. I heard the last couple, so if I call on somebody that is already called on, please correct me, but I will popcorn it over to Meg.
Yeah, Meg is good to go.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Meg Dozak from Moraine Valley Community College. Nice to be with everybody today. Over the weekend, I was at a friend's wedding and seated, with my husband and I don't know, I think it was a table of 8. And I had met this woman many times before, and the entire night I called her the wrong name. And my husband didn't tell me until like we were leaving. He's
Oh
like,
no.
not so and so, that's so and so. And I'm like, okay, would have been nice to maybe have a heads up a little earlier. So I did get to see her on the way out, and I just said, I'm like, I'm so sorry, I was calling you the wrong name. She's like, oh, I knew who you meant. I knew you meant me. So it was so embarrassing though.
Oh, Meg, that's such a good one, though. Thank you for sharing that. Who
Yeah.
goes next?
Oh, let's see. How about Kendra?
Hello, yes. Hi, everyone. This is Kendra from Kankakee Community College. Nice to be on this webinar with you all. I have a kind of a, I guess, similar memory fail, if you will. I went to lunch with my friends just a couple weeks ago. It was in July, and we were kind of waiting a little bit of a long time for our waitress to take our food order. And she finally came around and took our order. And for whatever reason, I completely forgot that had just happened. And I went up to the station where the computer is, and I went up to her and I said, hey, can we place our order? And she's like, um, I'm pretty sure I just took it and I just completely, for whatever reason, blanked. And I was like, wow, yeah, you certainly just did. But in my defense, I feel like I have like complete mom brain because I have a 3 year old and a 7 year old who wake me up multiple times a night. So that's kind of my justification for that memory fail.
Oh, thanks for sharing that one. Who's next, Kendra?
Did Elizabeth Stickle go? Pass it to her.
Hi, no, I haven't gone yet. Hi, I'm Liz Stickle and I work with World Relief Chicagoland. Um, and I was thinking about my Zumba class is like a chance to fail a lot in a safe way where it's like, yeah, constant mistakes. I'm like, don't look at the mirror while you're dancing because it just you don't want to see what's happening. But it's fun and it's a way to for a perfectionist like me to kind of embrace not being perfect sometimes.
That's such a good one. I was running a women's trip or like a retreat trip to Cuba this past spring, and we took salsa lessons as part of the trip with
Oh, love it.
with professional Cuban dancers in Havana. So talk about an opportunity to fail. I've never failed so much in 2 hours in my whole life, but it was a lot of fun.
Yes. Yes.
Who's next, Liz?
What about Rianne? Rianne?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Rhiann May. I'm the brand new director of financial aid at Rend Lake College. This is just my second week, so my fail has been that we started working late with students this week, and I forgot to update my mother-in-law who was taking care of my son. Our daycare is closed this week, so I forgot to let her know that it would be 6 o'clock before I picked him up instead of 4. So there was just some confusion about what was happening. It didn't end up being a big deal. She was able to keep him. She didn't have plans. I didn't put anybody out, but it was still a moment of, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've been so focused on the new job that that kind of went to the background. So big mom fail there, but yeah,
This what
it ended
happens
up being okay.
what happens when moms have too many things they're trying to juggle at the same time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It looks like we still have, let's see, Cindy or Nazak.
Okay. What was Nasdaq? I'm sorry if I'm butchering that.
Oh, maybe they're away from their
Maybe not. Okay,
instructor.
Cindy. Oh, maybe there was a chat.
Oh, let's see. Check the chats. Ah, can't unmute. Can engage. Oh, okay, perfect. Nazak, do you want to maybe chat us a fail that you've had recently, and we keep an eye on you in the chat. And then Cindy, if you're here with us, you want to maybe share a fail with us?
Sure. The whole time I was trying to think of trying to narrow down just one because there's been so many. Kind of tough. When you're talking about your dog, I was thinking about how I yelled at my dog yesterday because she was driving me absolutely insane, which was a fail because that doesn't help, obviously. But here at work, I'm failing right now because I'm multitasking, unfortunately. But I also, yesterday, we were trying to translate a lot of our stuff into Spanish, which I don't speak very well. But I basically sent out the copies of the things that we're translating, and they weren't actual copies. So everything was translated in Spanish. And so now we have to translate back to English as well in another copy. So I just made double the work for all of us. So yeah, that's my fail for today and yesterday.
Oh, thanks, Cindy. That was a good one. Let's see. It says Lacey also can't unmute because she's working out of a public space. Oh no, only has 10% battery. Okay, well, stay with us as long as you can, Lacey. Hopefully we'll get you back on track. And then let's see, Nazak says, I was leading a team activity that involved art materials during our team retreat, and I left the art materials at home. We pivoted and were able to incorporate the activity during a meeting a few days later. That's my worst fear when I'm teaching in a workshop in person, that I'm going to forget essential materials for the workshop, but good job pivoting. Oh, I see, Lacey, your fail is that you left your house with your phone on 10% and no charger. Got it. Thanks for sharing that one. Okay, so that's Lacey and Nazak. And let's see, it looks like Amber, you look like you're new to the group, I think, but we're just actually doing an intro with what's a fail you've had recently. So do you have a little mini fail that you want to share with us?
Sure. So I just moved to a new state recently, and somewhere I've never been before, really. And I'm Amber Fornaciari, and I am part of the adult ed world as a professional development
Great.
provider.
Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Anyway, back to my story. So I was driving my kids from one place to another. We were just not anywhere we needed to be quickly, but I was driving and I thought I was following my GPS, and I was not. I consider myself to be a pretty uh, savvy person when following navigation and actually just getting myself around in general. I know some people say that they are not. And I completely missed the turn. And then every time it's like I couldn't follow my GPS. My brain was just like glitching. And so like every time it was trying to reroute me, I was going to doing a different thing than it wanted me to do. And just that's not me. But eventually, and my kids just started laughing. They thought it was so hilarious that the GPS was telling me to do things and I wasn't really listening, but I was listening, or at least I thought I was. And so it wound up being an adventure in our new town a little bit. But I finally did get on the right path, and I'm back where I need to be. But that was yeah, for sure, Christopher. It was just like this crazy. I couldn't get myself to go the right way, even though my GPS was trying to help. So
My gosh. Well, congratulations on making it out eventually of that debacle. And then you're not still driving in circles with your GPS, but that's funny. That is like a Bluey episode, Christopher. Thanks for sharing that. So obviously, and Pedro, we didn't get a chance to hear from you. Are you back by any chance? Okay, maybe not. All right. We'll have to get Pedro's fail later. We're all failing all the time, right? Like when we think about this fear of failure, fear of mistake making, and we build it up so much in ourselves, but in reality, everyone is making mistakes all the time. We're all screwing stuff up. We're all figuring it out. And, if we can normalize that a little bit more, it really does take that sense of fear of the unknown out of it a little bit. So I'm just gonna minimize my screen full of you guys and get back to. So quick famous fails. This is a little to get our competitive nature going and get us ready to go. In the chat, you can pop your answers in, but we'll just go one at a time. First person to get the answer wins my uh, ever-loving impressiveness of you. No real prizes today. Who was cut from his high school basketball team? This is an easy one. Michael Jordan, winner. Which social media platform was bought by Justin Timberlake and tried to make a comeback after 2000's popularity, but failed to regain users? MySpace, you got it. He was rejected from film school 3 times. Ooh, did I stump you guys? Yes, Spielberg. Got it, Spielberg. Which tech company launched a phone in 2010 that lost signal when it was held a certain way with the term antenna gate? Ooh, stumped again. It was Apple. This was one of the early Apple iPhones. If it was held in a certain direction, it just died. Who had the term mentally slow put on their permanent record? Einstein. Liz, you are good at these. We want you on our Jeopardy team. First 2 automobile companies failed for this guy. Yep, Ford, you guys are on a roll. Who was fired as an early job as a television news anchor? Not Diane Sawyer, Oprah. Yep, Oprah. Chris got it. She was fired from one of her first jobs. He was booed off stage from his first stand-up comedy appearance. Seinfeld, Meg's got it. Ooh, you guys are so smart. Good guesses, but Seinfeld is the answer. He was fired from the Grand Ole Opry and was told to go back to driving a truck. Not Hank Williams, but that's a good guess. Oh, I got you stumped on this one. This one was Elvis. Elvis got fired from the Opry. 2 more to go. Which large retail chain completely failed when they tried to expand into Canada? Not Walmart, but good guess. It's the other one. Target. Chris has got it. Yep. And my friends in Toronto are so jealous that we have Target. They always want it there and they don't have it. But it flopped there. And finally, who sold only one painting while he was alive? Van Gogh. Rand's got it. You guys are so smart. Right. So look at all these failures that have been happening that turned into people that were eventually incredibly successful, although Van Gogh never got to see it. All right, so we're going to get back into kind of our thinking space now that we've done a little competitive exercise. Why do we fear failure so much, right? So there's a lot of reasons that we fear failure, and everyone's probably got a slightly different reason for fearing failure. But some of it is social conditioning and just the perfectionism that pervades many of our communities, our lives, our workplaces, right? So from the time that we're young, we're told like be good, do your best, do better. We're in competition with each other sometimes. We're conditioned to like not screw things up, to prove that we can do things well. Perfectionism is sort of something that's ingrained in many of us from the time we're little kids, right? Another reason that we might fear failure is shame, right? Because if we did screw something up or make a mistake, there were repercussions. We were told that we weren't good enough. There were negative consequences. Maybe people were disappointed in us. Failure was harmful to us in some way. And then identity is really important, right? So, depending on your identity, if you are a person of color, a woman, another marginalized identity that you identify with, oftentimes I've heard, especially from my women BIPOC colleagues, that the idea is like you have to do 10 times better than everyone else just to be treated the same way, right? So failure is something that maybe some of us have more privilege to do. We have sort of more room and more flexibility and more grace, whereas other people, failure has some serious consequences, right? Depending on your identity, depending on your role, depending on your amount of privilege. We're going to think a little bit more about that too. And then finally, workplace judgment or performance pressure. So you may be in a workplace where failure is not an option, right? We've seen those signs up in places, and there could be really unrealistic expectations from your colleagues, from your supervisors, from your team. There could be a layoff culture where if you're not the best, you're going to get cut. I have a friend who works in the corporate world, and like every year, the bottom X% of staff, when it comes to their performance reviews, gets fired, and that's it. And so, if you're in the bottom 15% or whatever it is, you have no job. So, in those situations, that fear of failure is very real and really valid, right? We also have, I call it with my therapy clients, sort of the Instagram effect, where we also might think that everyone else is doing amazing, right? That no one else is screwing up. Everyone else has it all together. Everybody else is doing A+ work all the time. And that's just not true, right? As we saw in our Fail-a-Bration opening today, people are screwing up all the time. But a lot of the time we don't talk about it. We don't hear about it. We only hear about the good stuff that's happening or the wins people are having. So there's a sense that everybody else is getting it right and we're not. And this is just my feelings wheel here. And so when we're thinking about failure, it's also helpful to consider for yourself what feelings come up for you when you think about failing, right? What does it feel like when you consider failure? So we can either unmute or use the chat on this one, but what comes up for you when you think about failing or when you have failed or when you've been in a failure situation? Ooh, annoyed. Yeah, especially if you're like, I should have been able to do this, or I screwed it up. We've got anxiety, ashamed. Ooh, so many good ones. Hold on, I got to scroll back up here. So we've got annoyed, anxiety, ashamed, discomfort, frustrated, insecure, disappointed, embarrassment, frustration. Yeah, embarrassment, definitely. These are really good ones. And some of them are kind of similar, and then some of them are really different. So, like annoyed, irritated, frustrated, right? Lots of uncomfortable emotions come up when we either think about failing, are afraid of failing, or actually fail, right? Does anybody feel fine about failure? Neutral, peaceful, content, accepting? Anybody here is like, yeah, failure, I'm cool with it. Not Kendra. No, right? Failure is a really uncomfortable feeling mostly. Ah, Christopher said eventually. Maybe we get to that point at some stage where we can kind of be okay with it, but at first it might really hit us the wrong way. Yeah. And so I think something for us to consider when we have a look at the feelings wheel. Oh, and I'll make sure you guys have these slides so you don't have to screenshot or write any of this down. But um, a goal to work on maybe when we're thinking about our relationship with failure, because that's what we're really talking about, right? It's not about not failing, it's about changing our relationship to failure. Is what if we could shift those feelings from annoyed, embarrassed, frustrated? What if we could shift some of that to feeling maybe more neutral, right? That maybe present or accepting or um, even trusting that like when we fail, we can kind of come back from it. But what would it be like if we shifted how we felt about failure from those more negative and uncomfortable feelings to something a little bit more neutral, if not actually positive or optimistic yet, right? All right, let's see how we are on time. You're not too bad. Okay. All right, so we're going to do our first breakout where you all are going to get a chance to chat with each other because you all have a lot of wisdom. And let's see if I can do breakouts. Excellent. Okay, so our first breakout, the questions that you guys have for yourselves to consider together are number one, what messages did you receive about failure, either growing up in your family or early on in your career? Right? When you were new to your career or coming up through your family in your childhood and teen years, what are the messages that you got about failure? And how do you yourself see that fear of failure currently showing up in your work, if you do? And if not for you, maybe for your colleagues or your students. So I'll try to put those into the chats once you're in your groups as well. But what messages did you receive about failure and how do you see fear of failure showing up in your work? All right, so I should have told you all to nominate a team captain before you went into your rooms, but I forgot to tell you that. So I would love to hear from each of the three groups, just a little summary of like what came up in your group, either, common themes that you heard or something that was really interesting or unexpected. So there was one group with Elizabeth, one group with Amber, one group with Chris. You don't have to be the team captains, but if somebody from each of those groups can just unmute and share with us a little bit about sort of the highlights of what you all learned from each other or talked about.
Yeah, I can share for our group. Um, I mean, we were talking about, it seemed like perfectionism, a little bit of perfectionism was a common theme, and talked about how sometimes in our work that it kind of pays off, or like you end up, it's kind of rewarded for being detail oriented. You need to do it to check on things, but then sometimes that can end up hurting your time management or if you're trying to avoid or make all these contingency plans, then it ends up maybe hurting your work sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a lot of roles, being detail oriented and being sort of preemptively anxious about things that could go wrong is your job or is really rewarded. So that's a tough one. Thanks for sharing that. How about someone from Amber's group?
I can share. Two of us noted that uh, I found this interesting. Jocelyn and I are both the oldest in our families, and so we connected and had a similar experience of having kind of this black and white. It was either it's right and it's wrong, or and if it's wrong, then it was it worth even doing? Like, if you didn't do it perfectly. And we both, as she talked more about being the oldest in her family, but that was also the case for me. And then we had another person in our group that talked about how that wasn't the case for them as far as like the big stuff, but like academics and things like that. But for some of the smaller stuff at home, it was kind of like that. So that was interesting to talk about. And then I brought up how we were just getting into this when we got cut off, of
Oh
course, but
no.
I said that the way that I see that come up in my own work is being intimidated to reveal my mistakes. Feeling if that's shame or if that's just feeling not confident in how I dealt with it, or if I even if it's already corrected, just revealing my mistakes is hard.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And I think most people probably relate to that sense of like telling on yourself and being found out can be really overwhelming. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Great. And somebody from Chris's group.
I'll go ahead. Much of our time was centered on the first question, but there were some things said that kind of like gave like understanding as to how we would answer the second question. We all resonated with our conditioning within elementary, where our parents would tell us, "Hey, you need to do good in school. You need to get yourself right. You need to have good grades in your report card." Some of us had noted like that they were harder on themselves, but how like our first experience with the concept of failure was just the importance of being right. And if you were wrong or you didn't do well in school, that there were consequences. And within the fear of failure being up at work, for us that hold roles that entail like overseeing compliance or some like things related to law, the more that you grow with responsibilities and your trajectory, there's less room for failure. There's a decrease in like what's permitted for things to be wrong or to be failed or to be missed. So we're kind of conditioned to this aspect of that. As you grow, you're not allowed to fail, or there's heavy consequences that either fall upon you or fall upon your team or fall upon the institution because your role or your duties may entail like some like law or compliance element.
Yeah, absolutely, right? There's different consequences for failure at different levels of an organization. And when it is a legal or a compliance issue, those consequences can be much bigger. But the reality is people still make mistakes and mess up, but we're much more likely to try to like shove it under the carpet or um, more embarrassed or more fearful of talking about it if there are those extra consequences, right? Because the mistakes still happen because no one's perfect. Um, yeah, those are really good points. I try really hard. So I'm the clinical director here at Urban Wellness. So I oversee about 30 therapists or so. And when I meet new therapists, I try right away to tell them I wear a lot of hats here. I do a lot of different things. That's a really cool part about my job, but also it means that I tend to like miss things because there are so many things happening at once. So often details fall through the cracks for me. So if you're ever waiting on a response from me or I haven't replied to your email, please give me a gentle nudge because chances are it got like lost in my many pages of to-do lists. And that's just unfortunately, I've accepted that for myself, part of who I am. And that's a fail for me sometimes, and that it's okay. I'm working on it, and I need you to kind of be aware of that part of who I am. And so I think in a lot of organizations, leadership sets the tone. And so if as you're moving higher in an organization, the pressure is higher and higher to be perfect and never make a mistake, that's going to be a really big challenge. If you have somebody at the head of your organization that's like, hey, we screw things up all the time, it's part of being human, and it's not like the fail is okay necessarily, but it's like the fail is inevitable and we will figure it out. And I think that the tone set at the top really makes a big difference. So yeah, if you're in an organization where the higher you go, the less room there is to screw up, the more pressure that's going to feel. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, we are still nearly on track for time. I will get you guys out on time. If we have to speed up at the end, it'll be okay. So what are the costs of avoiding failure, right? So we know that there are costs of failure. There are legal or compliance issues, time, money. People might be frustrated, right? There's lots of things that can go wrong when we screw things up or make mistakes. But there are also costs of perfectionism. And some of you mentioned that a little bit just now. But one is innovation stalls. When we're afraid of making mistakes, we are not trying new things, right? We're not thinking outside the box. We're not getting creative with solutions because we might be afraid that it might not work or it might not go well. So we may stick with the way we've always done things, the tried and true method, even if it's not fantastic, even if it has flaws, even if it maybe leaves people out or isn't inclusive. Maybe it's not the best way to do things, but it's just the way that we know works well enough. So when we're trying to avoid failure or when we're too afraid to try an outside of the box solution, we don't get cool, new, innovative ideas. We don't get to build new programs. We don't need to design new strategies. We kind of get stuck in the rut of our old ways. And you guys can use the chat to chime in if these resonate with you or if you have maybe experiences where this has happened or even just like a yes, this is how my department feels all the time. Would love to hear from you guys in the chat. It also leads to decision paralysis. So when we're trying really hard to avoid a mistake or avoid failure, sometimes we just don't choose. And I see this a lot with my therapy clients when they have a big decision to make, whether it's like, should I leave my job to take this new job? Or should I move to a new city? Or should I have this hard conversation with a friend? Or et cetera, right? Anytime someone has to make a big decision, our fear of failure sometimes gets in the way of making a choice, even if that choice is really good for us, right? The what if I choose wrong? And so we do nothing. And this can show up at work in terms of, whether or not to launch a new program or how to go about creating a new product or service, or, should we do it this way or that way, or who should we hire for this role? When we're afraid to make a mistake, sometimes these things drag on for ages because the fear of choosing is too high. Failure and avoiding failure definitely, as we've all talked about already this morning, fuels this sense of perfectionism and having to do it right. It also fuels burnout. So maybe like a yes in the chat if you've ever been burned out in a job. I think most of us probably have, but maybe not everyone. I know I definitely have. And when we're afraid of failure, the likelihood of us being burned out in our job skyrockets. And that's for a few reasons. But one of them is that the idea of being able to be creative and innovative and make a change and make a difference in our work buffers against burnout, right? When we feel like we can do something new, we can try new things, we can make mistakes and nobody will be, mad at us or hard on us, that it's okay, that sense of psychological safety, that is a direct buffer against burnout. Because when we're burned out, it's not just about being exhausted. So some of you that were either in our in-person sessions in the spring or some of our other online sessions, we talked about burnout a little bit. Burnout happens when we don't feel like we are collaborating, when we don't feel that we have a supportive team around us. It happens when expectations are so high and our resources to meet those expectations are too low. And that happens a lot in perfectionism, right? Burnout happens when we don't feel connected to the values of what we're doing. And burnout happens when we don't feel appreciated and supported. So all of these things kind of fall into this space of if we're not taking chances, taking risks, feeling supported and cared about, then we're going to be burned out much quicker. And burnout looks like exhaustion, but it also looks like feeling sort of like a lack of purpose. Why bother? What's the point? And it also looks like maybe feeling cynical, irritable, not feeling engaged and connected to your work or your colleagues. And then finally, avoiding failure really does lead to reduced collaboration and trust. Partially because if it has to be perfect, I know this is something that I fall into, I'll just do it myself, right? If it has to be perfect and if a mistake is not going to be okay, then how can I delegate this to someone else, not knowing for sure if they're going to get it right? And this happens at home. My poor husband, usually when I teach classes afterwards, he's like, how many times did you pick on me in your class today? And the answer is usually many, but I think we're going to only maybe do one today. But when I delegate things at home to him that I usually do, they do not get done to the same standard as I do. Primary parents in the audience, let me know if you relate to this one. But um, it's not that he can't do it. It's just that it's not going to be perfect. And my perfectionism sometimes gets in the way of just saying like, okay, fine, do this. He can cook dinner, but he doesn't cook dinner very well. And so even if I am really overwhelmed, I will usually still cook dinner, even if I don't really have time, because if he does it, no one's really going to want to eat it, right? Unless we're ordering takeout or putting a frozen pizza in the oven, which he can manage just fine. And it's fine. He has skills that I don't have, right? He's a plumber and a carpenter. He can build a house, and I have no skills. Lacey mows the lawn at your house because he just won't do it right. But this is, those are fun examples and silly examples, but they really do show up in the workplace, especially because if we can't trust someone to do it well enough, knowing that mistakes are okay, inevitable, totally fine. If they do, it's no big deal. Then we end up doing it ourselves. We're not collaborating. We're not sharing that opportunity for growth with others, and we're not trusting other people to do a good enough job. So that does pop up a lot, I think, in the workplace. All right, that's enough of me talking, I think. We want to hear a little bit more from you guys, and then you're going to get to have another breakout soon, I promise. Okay, so that said, what does that fear of failure cost as individuals or teams for you? You guys can use the chat or unmute, but if you think about within your team, do any of those tend to show up in your team or other things that I didn't mention? Let me pop that back up. Have you noticed innovation stalls, not being able to make decisions, more burnout, or trust issues because that fear of failure shows up within your team or your office space?
Here, I'll come off mute because I don't know if typing it would do it right.
Yeah, coming off mute's definitely better for these. Not everyone can, but if you can, it would be better.
Yeah. So at a past institution, part of my responsibilities was overseeing a basic needs resource center, and there was an ask made of the staff to implement this new initiative that would have put a lot more work on the team because there was no structure, no foundation for it to work off. You have to like build it, just make it happen, but it has to be done well. So there's already the pressure of like having to do something well at the institution with no basis to work off of. And if it didn't, they'd be concerned about around the campus leadership. Okay, is this office really doing its job?
Mhm.
So for the team, there was just a sense of like, okay, well, we just got to get it done. But the feeling or the um investment in like really wanting to make it happen wasn't there because there's such high pressure placed upon them to do it well versus giving this sense, okay, let's just explore and see what's possible.
Mhm.
Um, so they were given a tall order to make something happen that hadn't been done, and it had to like exist. And it gave the team the sense of like, I don't know if reluctance is the right word or just long story short, there's just like no sense of emotional investment. Or like, let's just get it done. Apathy, maybe apathy was the right word.
Yeah, and that's another sort of driver of burnout, right? When people don't feel engaged and invested in the work, then yeah, that apathy happens. That's a great example. Thank you for that. Anybody else have seen any of these within their teams, organizations?
I'll pipe in and just say that I see these kinds of things with my students all the time when I'm teaching, especially like decision paralysis or uh, just innovation stalls. This idea of, especially because usually I teach math, there are people that think it has to be, there's only one right answer, and that's not always true and not actually usually true. And so then they don't even reach for what could be possible because they know that there's only one answer, or they think they know that there's only one answer. And also that also plays a part into there's more than one way to solve a math problem usually, and people deciding which one to use. I find in my math class often my students are saying things like, um, I don't know, you tell me, which way should I do it? So it's like kind of stalling that problem solving and that growth and that learning that's supposed to be happening in the classroom.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point, right? That like not just within our workplace teams and colleagues, but within the students that you work with, whether you're a teacher or a counselor or in student services or administration, the fear of failure or that avoiding getting it wrong or mistake making can put a lot of young people, I know we have some returning students as well, but young people in a position where they don't know what to do and they feel frozen. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one before we go forward? All right. So that's what it's costing us. But if we can reframe it, we can really use failure as a teacher, right? We can think about how we can flip our mindset around failure from the problem in the room to the thing that helps us learn, grow, and move forward, right? So when we can reframe failure, I still use the word failure, but some people need to change it to something else. But if we can reframe failure as an opportunity for learning, it really does help to shift those really negative connotations that we have in our brains. Ooh, first attempt at learning. I love that. And if we change the at to in, we can make it say fail as an acronym. First attempt in learning. I'm going to use that one. I'm going to write it down. First attempt learning is my new fail acronym. Love when I get something new out of a session like that. Experimentation, that's a really good one too, right? So when we can reframe that, we really can decide to, sorry, I have to move that so I can see my screen there. We can really figure out when to say when. So there's a great book called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski, which is a wonderful book for women especially, but all people around burnout and what happens in our brains and bodies. But one of the things they talk about is this idea they call the monitor. And it's in our brains how we know when to say stop when something isn't working, right? At what point is the value of keeping going at something less important than actually saving our energy? So when we're working on a project or doing a math problem or whatever it is, if we're afraid of failure, we keep pushing at all costs to try to get it right, even when it is clearly not working, right? So the monitor tells us, hey, enough is enough. It's time to stop. And often our monitors are really bad at getting us to stop if we're perfectionists, right? So we may be really deep into working on something that is clearly not successful, but stopping means failure and keeping going means we haven't failed yet. Um, I'd love to hear some examples of that if you guys have any. So think through maybe something that you worked too long and too hard on, way past the point when we should have been doing it. But some famous examples of this are Pixar has something called a fail fast culture, if you've heard about this. But their idea is really you should be failing all the time, right? That we should be failing often, quickly, frequently, that failure is actually an inevitable part of the creative process. So when we fail, it's an opportunity to move on to the next thing, to learn from it, to build on it. That failure is actually a consequence of doing something new. And so when they say fail fast, what they mean is we want early and rapid iterations of things, right? So like, let's try it. And when it stops working, we scrap it. We use what we learned from that to start the fresh one and go again. So instead of really getting stuck on trying to fix something that's not working or like really wrestle with something that isn't a smooth process, we go, nope, that didn't work. Let's start fresh, try again, go from there. And we're constantly starting again, scrapping what doesn't work and building from what does work. And that's a very different mindset from like, we're not going to fail, we're not going to fail, we're going to keep going on this thing when it's not the right thing. And then I'm sure you guys have probably heard also the sort of story of Dyson that, Dyson did over 5,000 tries at those vacuum cleaners before he got one that worked well. 5,000 prototypes and just had to keep scrapping them and scrapping them and scrapping them. And that's okay, right? That's fast failure. Build it. Does it work? No. Okay. What did we learn? What do we want to keep? What do we want to get rid of? Scrap it, start again. And so this idea of fast failure might not work in your particular team, organization, depending on what you're doing. Like you said, we've got legal and compliance, but the idea, the mindset that if we're working on something and it's not what we need, it's not going according to plan, there's something wrong with the system, it's okay to say stop. This is clearly not working. Let's try something different, right? And it may not be as drastic as scrapping the whole thing and starting from scratch, but knowing when to say when to stop pushing and when to give ourselves a break and say like, oh, that just didn't work. We, as an example here, we started a program a few years ago where we hired new grads right out of grad school to be therapists. In the past, back in my day, you would graduate from grad school and you would spend a good few years working in community mental health or maybe in a school or a hospital setting, gaining experience, and sort of eventually you might join a group practice when you're more tenured and you've gotten experience and you're ready to be a therapist in an office. Nowadays, people are graduating from school and they want to be therapists right away, right? You may be a counselor who just graduated. You may know of some counselors that just graduated. And so this is kind of a newer thing where newer grads in counseling and social work are coming straight into private practice. So we started a program for new grads where we were giving them weekly supervision, group supervision, a lot of support and training in terms of how to get the job done. But we also had a full-time salary model where there was an expectation of how many clients everyone needed to see a week in order to be able to be on full-time benefits and all of these things. We very rapidly found out that new grads who had never been in a full-time workplace before really didn't have the capacity, generally speaking, to jump straight into seeing a full-time caseload, managing their own mental health, managing their own self-care, all the training and education that was needed. The group that we put together, we had a different facilitator each week because we thought it would be great for them to meet more of our tenured clinicians, but we weren't able to create a cohesive group feel for them, so they weren't connecting. It failed, right? It just failed. Every one of those initial new grads in that first year either left the organization, moved away, or went back to a different type of work. None of them felt like this was the right fit for them, right? And it was my project. And so I had to go, that one really failed. So instead of hiring more new grads right away, we went back to the drawing board. What didn't work? We needed to start them part-time. We needed to let them build up their caseloads gradually. We needed to have one person facilitating this group every week to build this sense of community and connection. We needed to change up how we did their training and their onboarding, lots of things. But we had to create all of those changes before we could hire on a new set. Thanks, Jocelyn. Thanks for coming. So we really did need to use failure as a teacher and look at every single point that we failed at before we could make a success out of it. All right. We're going to have another breakout so you all can learn from each other a little bit more. So the question for this breakout is, think about a time when failure helped you grow, and what did it teach you?
I failed numerous times, but I had to learn to give myself grace because people were watching me as to whether or not I gave myself grace, because ultimately that would reflect how I would treat them when they failed.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kendra. And that, I mean, it just sounds like you're a great leader. So I'm glad that you're leading by example, even when things aren't perfect. Um, I think one specific thing I was thinking about was a time earlier in my career, and I was just trying to I was looking for a job and nothing was like coming together. I was doing a lot of interviews and doing a lot of sending in my resume and stuff like that. And it was really painful. I wouldn't want to relive it, but I feel like I did learn a lot from it, like learned a lot about how to interview and how to connect with people. And then finally, I had someone who was, further along in her career. She basically said, like, here's what I would suggest, here's what you need to do to get started. And it was really, really helpful. So yeah, I wouldn't want to relive it, but it was really helpful. I did learn a lot from it.
Um, for me, I think back my transition from high school into college way, way, way long ago, and realizing the level of success I had with high school in terms of having a high GPA and then entering college for the first time, and then starting with the low level performance, it really humbled me. But it forced me to reflect and think, okay, what am I doing within my habits, within my understanding of the content? And my engagement with, my courses that has resulted in low performance. It made me realize that when it came to like explaining my thoughts, articulating how I got to the answers that I did, it was poor. I always focused on just doing step by step, being autopilot and just going through the motions, but not really making a point to break down for myself. How did I get to this point? How did I get to this conclusion? So it helped me realize there was more room for me to grow in how I communicated, but also how I went about the work and making sure that I'm being diligent and going through every step versus just autopiloting and going through the motions. It forced me to be present too.
I echo Christopher's point there and really looking at sort of that self-reflection when it comes to failure. But I also think those moments of failure for me have also allowed me to reflect and be able to advocate for myself as to what sort of information I need beforehand, what questions to ask, what type of supports I might need, whether it's in, the workplace or an academic environment. So along those sort of self-reflection pieces and where can I step up a bit more and where do I need to improve, but also being able to advocate for myself on where I need others to also help and support me along the way.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Those are all really important insights on how failure can actually help us grow. And in the moment, it doesn't feel good, right? Like this is not a sort of ultra positive, toxic positivity, yay, failure. Like it sucks to fail, right? And the amount of people that go from high school to college and really have a struggle like with that transition and grades and managing all the expectations, responsibilities, giving ourselves grace. None of these things are easy. And so it's not to say that when we go into a hard situation or when we're experiencing failure, we should be rosy about it, right? Like failure is not pleasant, even when it's helping us grow. And I think, Christopher, you said earlier, like eventually you can have a more neutral feeling about it, right? So there are going to be times, depending on the context, that failure is really hard, really upsetting, really gut-wrenching. And it may only be later that we can look back and see maybe some lessons or some growth in it. So it's not about every time we make a mistake, like cheering about it. That's sometimes not realistic, but giving ourselves that space to look back on it, or even when it's happening, knowing, yes, this is really hard. Yes, this does not feel good. And in the future, I'm hoping I can take something from this experience. All right, we have a little bit of time left, so we're going to keep going. So when we're thinking about this in terms of our work, our colleagues, our teams, or our students, really thinking about the culture shift to normalize failure, right? Not to, like I said, to be necessarily cheerful or that toxic positivity about it, but just to normalize it as a regular part of the human experience, right? Because when we fear something, a lot of the times, like we said, it feels like it was only us and everyone else is getting it right, and we're the only ones screwing it up. So if we can normalize failure as an inevitable part of the human experience that is painful, that is a struggle, that is disappointing, but is also part of living life in the world, it really does help. So psychological safety is going to be a really top important piece of the puzzle here. And that really means in this context, permission to fail, permission to make a mistake, permission to try something that doesn't necessarily work out. So if you are a leader, if you are someone who has responsibility for other people, whether it's your students or your colleagues, really vocalizing this idea that we are okay with trying stuff out, seeing what happens, making mistakes, trying again, right? Going through different iterations of things, and that when we screw stuff up, we just work through it, right? We work through it and we move forward. So if you can create that atmosphere within your culture, it really is going to make a huge difference in terms of people trying stuff out, showing up, and being willing to take some risks and be brave. If you're not a leader, you can still do this within your own sphere of influence, right? Within the people that you connect with day to day by sharing your own fails and mistakes within your family, within your friends and your community. So we can still sort of bring around that normalization in whatever sphere you touch. Language is important. So we talked about this a little bit, shifting from mistake to experiment, shifting from fail to iteration, right? Thinking about how we use language can be important. So if we can, or, we'll say things like huge mom fail, if you can say it in a way that doesn't feel devastating, but a way that just feels like an inevitable part of what we do, that's okay. But shifting our language can be really powerful. And then finally, modeling curiosity instead of blame. So when something does go wrong, we're not looking for like who's the person who screwed it up and made this mistake and putting the blame. It's more about curiosity of like, I'm wondering how we came to be where we're at. I'm wondering what part of this didn't go according to plan. We'll talk a little bit more about those strategies. So I think we're going to skip this third breakout only because of time. But some questions maybe for your own kind of journaling or introspection or, what would it look like if we were able to normalize failure more within our teams, right? What would be different? If you think right now about like, would there be anything that would change within your team or your students or your department if failure was just a little bit more like run of the mill part of what we do? And then what would help you take risks despite the chances of failure, right? What would make you more likely to try things out? For me, I have developed a bunch of programs here at Urban Wellness. Some have been successful, some not so much. But what really helps me take the risks is that my boss, our owner of our practice, has been really supportive, and she takes the mindset of, let's try it. What's the worst that can happen? If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Let's give it a shot and see what happens. And so that support has really made it possible for me to go, okay, let's give it a try. That I know that I'm not going to get ridiculed or punished. And, when our first iteration of our new grad program didn't work out, we didn't, I wasn't in trouble that it didn't go well. We came back to the drawing board and figured out what we needed to change to try again. And so that leads us to these tools for failing forward. So this idea that one way to normalize failure is to talk about it in terms of failing as part of the process, right? We fail in order to get to the next place. And so some strategies for that could be after action reviews, which can be a structured, but you can also kind of make it work your own way, a structured conversation where after a project, after a class, after a launch of something, after you have to submit a big proposal, whatever it is, there's a facilitated discussion, really looking at what happened, right? What went well and maybe what didn't go so well. Why did it happen, right? That curiosity part, right? What created the circumstances we found ourselves in? And what could we have done differently in any step along the way, right? And this isn't about fault finding or blaming. It really is about looking at the entirety of a project and a process and looking at each step along the way, saying, like, could we have made a different choice? What might have that led to, right? This part went well, this part didn't go so well. Why do we think that this didn't land the way we thought it would? And this is really what we had to do with our new grad program, right? What went well and what parts of this really didn't land the way that we expected? And then when you're thinking about the parts that didn't go so well, this idea of a what went wrong retrospective is looking back at the situation that didn't go so well and really thinking about, in a structured way, how to analyze the parts that didn't go well, right? What happened? Why didn't it go well? What could we have done differently specifically in those pieces? And it really is about creating this culture where we're always learning and we're willing to make changes, and every time we can do better. So even if a project is generally a success, you can do a what went wrong retrospective to see, even within a successful project, where there are parts that didn't go so well. Maybe our communication wasn't great. Maybe there were some tense interactions along the way, right? We still have a success at the end, but were there pieces along the way that we can learn from? And then, right, just like we started at the beginning of this conversation, this idea of sharing your fails, right? A failure of the month, starting meetings off with mini fails. What mistakes did we make? And this is really powerful when it starts from a top-down mentality. So when our senior leaders are in on this, it really gives younger folks, newer staff, an ability to feel safe to do it. If you're in a role where you work with students, this is a great way to help them normalize mistake making and failure. So if you're a teacher, you can have your kids at the beginning of class go through a little fail-a-bration, right? Let's everybody share a mini mistake we've made recently. You can start with really little ones. Some people will bring out bigger ones. I was teaching a fail-a-bration workshop in person a few years ago, where we were doing a storytelling process. And so everyone in the room was creating a story that they were going to share with everyone else in this room that they didn't know very well about a failure in their life. And I told everyone, like, make it like a 3 to 6 out of 10 fail, right? We didn't want something super, super trivial, but we also didn't want people to be like bearing their worst traumas in their lives, but somewhere middle of the road. And these folks' stories were incredible. We had everyone from, someone who was a failed foster carer and telling her story about that, to someone who somehow got roped into going on a kayaking trip with a bunch of his friends, but didn't want to tell anyone that he didn't know how to swim and was embarrassed and ended up on this kayaking trip where he couldn't swim, and it was a lot of funny drama. But by the end of that workshop, everyone in that room felt really connected to one another because they had just spent this time sharing some pretty, vulnerable experiences with one another, with basically strangers. But that idea of connecting with others and that sense of common humanity and shared experience was really powerful. So this is something you can do with your teams, with your students, not just a little snippet, but actually some storytelling if you wanted to. I really enjoyed using that with teams. Um, and then really reframing questions. So when we're talking about failure, whether it's for ourselves or people that we supervise or our students, really thinking through these introspective insights of like, what did I learn from this? And maybe in the moment isn't the right time. When someone has just had a fail and they're vulnerable and upset, it's not the time for either, whether it's you or you're supporting someone else, not the time to go in with like, well, what did we learn from this? But when things have settled and when people are feeling a little bit less raw and vulnerable, it's a really important time to ask, what did we learn here? Right? This was not good. It didn't go well, but we learned something. What would I try differently? Right? What are the things that I could have done differently? What would I do in the future if I had the opportunity for a redo? And really importantly, I like this question, what courage did I show? Because when we fail, we always have to show up with a part of ourselves that's it's not easy. So whether it's courage to say stop, right? To let that monitor make that decision that enough is enough. It takes courage to say, hey, this isn't working. I know we've all really worked hard on this, but we're going to have to try something different. This is not the right answer. Or it takes courage to keep trying things and shifting and pivoting when things aren't going well. Or it takes courage to put your hand up and tell your boss or your colleagues or even your students, hey, I really screwed this up. I'm really sorry. I made this mistake. I'm not really sure how to fix it, but here's what happened. And hopefully they can help you move forward with that. But there's a lot of courage involved in failure. And we usually think of failure as shameful. And so if we can find the courage in that, it's a really powerful way to reframe how our brains experience that. All right, I'm gonna get you out of here with a few minutes to spare before your next meeting. So if you have a pen and paper, it would be a good time to take a couple of minutes to write for yourself. If you don't, that's okay. You can just kind of meditate on this for a little bit. But I'd like for you to write down or think about just one failure that you've had in your life that you're willing to reframe today based on everything that we've talked about, right? How can you view that through a different lens? Something that maybe you've been embarrassed or ashamed of, something that you don't feel that good about, a failure that was kind of hard for you. And just thinking about how you might be able to shift that into looking at it through this lens of like, what did I learn? How have I moved differently since that fail? And where did I show courage? Just give you a minute or two to either write about that or think about it. Okay. And to wrap us up with our couple of folks who are still hanging on, I appreciate you guys sticking with me till the end. Just thinking about what is one small risk or experiment that you might try maybe this week or this month, even if you might fail. Anything you might just kind of give a shot that you might be a bit worried about, but you're going to go for it, even if it might not work out. I think we've still got Brittany, Christopher, and Kendra, and Liz still on the line. You can chat or unmute, whatever works better for you. Christopher's going to do your son's hair. Okay. That could be a fail, and I'm glad you're going to risk it. I just gave my 9-year-old son a buzz cut in the backyard this past weekend, and it was only okay because he wanted a straight, just number 3 all over buzz cut. So it worked out okay. But my husband was not, uh, he wasn't too sure about it. He didn't think it was a good idea. What else might we risk this week, this month? I'm going to try to go for a 1-mile jog with my new puppy this week. Well, he's almost a year old, but he's a wild puppy and he's huge. So I'm going to try to take him for a run and see if we can run for a whole mile. It may not go well. We're going to try. Liz, Kendra, Brittany, anything that you guys are going to give a risk this week? Liz says, I think the next time I get observed by my supervisor while I'm teaching, I'll be willing to try something new to get her feedback on it. I usually just do safe bets, but it would be valuable to try something new and hear feedback on it. I love that, right? Especially when we're being observed, we tend to stick in that lane of this is the way we've always done things. We'll keep it safe, we'll keep it regular. But when we try something new that may or may not work well, we can get some feedback, we can grow from it, and it might work out. It might be a huge win. So thanks for that. Lacey's got a student meeting on Friday and is going to see if you can push him outside of his comfort zone when job searching. Love that. Yeah, and it might work. It may not work so well, but I think it's worth trying. Yep.
I'll share something I already took a risk on earlier in the week, and I don't know how it will pan out, but I've never volunteered for like any of like the national or state associations that I'm a part of. And I took a risk and I volunteered for the National Association of Financial Aid Administrators. And I've been, like I said earlier, I've been in financial aid 14 years and never done it. So I just put myself out there and I'm like, hey, let's go for it. I might be absolutely horrible or I might be great. I don't know. So we're going to see how it pans out.
Great. Oh, thanks for sharing that. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we push ourselves out of our comfort zones, we never know what's going to happen. So, all right. Well, we made it to the end. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. I would love to hear from you in the future. Keep that Fail-a-Bration going. So if there is something that you just want to share at some point of a big fail or a risk you take or ways that you try something out, please feel free to email me. Stay in touch. We'll be doing two more of these webinars. There'll be a September and an October webinar. And then as Amy said at the beginning, I will be coming around in November to do a Central Illinois, a Southern Illinois, and then a Northern Illinois full day workshop on a few really cool well-being topics. So hopefully I'll get to see some of you in real life.